Welcome to a community built of tomorrow's business leaders. Hey guys, I'm William Freitas, and this is the Socius Podcast. Socius, welcome back to another episode. Today we've got Calvin Chilchik. Calvin, welcome to the show.
Appreciate you having me.
Now, there's a lot that we're going to dive into. I know Calvin from Club of United Business, which is a networking group that I'm actively part of for many years now, a few years, and I've known Calvin for a few years since I started there. But we're going to want to dive into, I guess, where you are now, which is Club of United Business, but your background and what had you be here today. So give us an introduction, a little bit about you, where it all started, and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so currently I'm one of the part owners of Cub. I run the Sydney part of the business, and I guess what we are is a members club for entrepreneurs and business owners. So we've got around 1,500 odd members across Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. They're all owners, founders, CEOs, so they're the key decision makers of the businesses. We've got a few different communities for different size businesses, and it's industry agnostic, so we do like to diversify as much as we can. And I guess in essence, what we do is we actively facilitate relationships between our members through a number of events, forum type scenarios. But I suppose fundamentally speaking, the way we position it is as a community of founders coming together to be around others who are cut from the same cloth. Obviously building good organic relationships of that nature over time, and just letting that kind of opportunity fall as a byproduct of that. So currently, as I said, running the Sydney part of the business. I'm also the national sales director, so I run the sales team across Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and big things to come for us.
Yeah, nice. And so let's dive into what makes Calvin tick and where you came from. So I'll be honest, I don't think people can pick up the accent now. I think you've been in Australia long enough, but you started in Johannesburg, is that right?
Yeah, so born in Johannesburg, moved to Sydney when I was 14, 15. So the accent's a little bit of an amalgamation of a few different accents, and people don't really know what's coming out of my mouth. But it was 14, 15 when we landed here. I think, growing up in Johannesburg's got a lot of problems. It's not the greatest kind of city in the world or greatest run city in the world, but my childhood memories growing up there were very good, good family life. I was taken care of. So I've got nothing bad to say about my experiences there. Obviously, people go through, and my family went through certain scenarios that kind of sparked the idea of like, let's get out of there and move to safer pastures, let's put it that way. Arrived here, first year of high school. I think looking back at it, obviously, it was a very daunting time, moving to a new country, you don't really know anybody, but I guess people and the ability to connect with people was something that I was always strong at throughout my whole life. My earliest memories of childhood was going on holidays with my family and finding groups of friends. And, that was something that always came naturally to me. And so I knew a couple people in Australia who introduced me to a couple people, and I was able to kind of integrate myself into a group of friends pretty quickly. Went to high school here, and I suppose growing up and going through high school was never academically inclined. So that was never something that I was strong at. I don't know if that was a result of lack of interest or if I was just not academically inclined, but either way, that wasn't a strong point of mine. But again, throughout my years in high school, always kind of had a strong group of friends, and building relationships was always something that came naturally to me. I suppose coming out of high school was where things got interesting. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I kind of, as I said, academically wasn't very strong. Everybody kind of finishes high school and goes to university, take a gap year and go to university. So we take the gap year, I'm doing my thing. We come back to Sydney, and all my mates are going to university. Everybody's applying for business or IT or whatever it might be. And I'm sitting there saying to myself, like, I've got no idea what I want to do. I haven't got the best ATAR. I'm a bit lost. So at that time was probably kind of classified as a little bit of a dropkick. All my friends are going to university. I took a second year off because I was confused. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was just taking little jobs here and there. And I suppose like that went on, as I say, for about a year or two. And now I'm getting to a point where, I'm getting into my early 20s. A lot of my mates are almost finishing uni, and I'm not even started yet. So decided at that point to kind of just give it a crack. You know, everybody's doing it. You've got to find a good job. Like just fucking give it a go kind of thing. So applied, went to university and hated it. Like could not wrap my head around like what I was being taught. Whilst I was there, decided to go and study overseas. So that was something that I really wanted to do. I went to America for 6 months. I suppose kind of your stereotypical American experience, and not much studying was done, but it was a great experience in terms of just getting away from Australia, getting away from all the pressures that I felt that I was experiencing at that time, and almost like consciously being able to make a decision, is this university thing actually something that I want to do? And coming off the back of that trip, actually decided to drop out. So now again, I'm sitting here and I'm now probably 22, 23. My mates have finished university. They've all started in their jobs. And again, I'm kind of stuck with nothing, no experience in anything, and no real kind of way forward in terms of getting a job. And wasn't business savvy or business inclined or even interested in business at that time. Serendipitously, once I got back, I ended up running into a friend of mine who at the time had a retail business, a toy retail business. They were at 5 shops at the time. And he kind of just said to me, like, you know, I was telling him my story. I'd just gotten back. I've got no job. Like, I'm pretty lost.
How old were you at this point?
Probably, I think 22,
okay.
23. And he just said to me, bro, come work in one of the shops. Like, obviously you need some cash. Like, just come work in one of the shops until you figure out what you're going to do. And so I did. And the shop was in Top Ride Shopping Centre. And I used to kind of go back and forth every day, just working as a shopkeeper. I was there for about 6 months. And basically, I was on a night out with these guys who owned the business, and we just started kind of having a conversation about me coming into a head office capacity. So they had some things that they wanted to implement into the shops, and they needed somebody to do it. They didn't have anybody. And so the next morning I woke up and I was kind of like, was this, you know, was it just because we had a few drinks, or was it for real? But I was like, you know what, I'm going to shoot my shot. So gave him a call and said, like, you know, I know kind of we were on the drink, but I don't know if this is a real opportunity or not, but I'd love to explore it. And he was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's sit down. So we sat down and he gave me the opportunity. And it started, as I said, very small. There were 5 shops. He had a loyalty system that he wanted to implement into the stores, and I had to go and implement them. So now I'm in a position where, like, that was probably the first time where it was kind of running into something that I was afraid of. You know, like, I'm going into all these shops. There's people who've been in retail, you know, these store managers, they've been in the stores 5, 10, 15 years. I'm this 22-year-old kid who's got no experience, and I have to train them on systems that we're implementing. So that was kind of my first foray.
And before you then kick on to the next section, like, let's talk about taking that opportunity for
sure.
a second. Because in your mind, do you think he would have called you if you didn't call him?
No chance. No chance. And it's an interesting point. And I think, you know, that carries on throughout your career. You've got to go and you've got to take what you want. You've got to find the opportunities and seek them out. Nobody's going to come to you for anything. If I had not given him that phone call, who knows where I'd be now.
Yeah, and it's all about taking the opportunity. And that's why I wanted to ask, because, yeah, maybe it was just a night out. Maybe it is just a flippant comment. Maybe he thought, oh, well, this person is 22-year-old. But that hunger that you demonstrated, the interest of, like, I actually want to try something new and I liked the idea, had him follow through with it. So, yeah, kudos to you.
Yeah, 100%. And I would say, like, at that time, I don't know what it was. I don't think it was hunger or ambition or anything like that. It was just kind of like I was so lost that, you know, I saw an opportunity and decided to kind of go for it. So that was kind of how it started at Toymate. And I suppose, you know, if you want to kind of wrap that side of the story up, I ended up in that business for 5 years. We grew that business from 5 shops to 25 shops in the period of time I was there. I ended up being essentially his right-hand man. So he was this, like, creative genius, you know, macro strategist. And to this day, like, obviously I'm surrounded by a lot of business owners, but he was one of the most jaw-droppingly smart people that I've ever kind of had the pleasure of being around. And he really took me under his wing and gave me a lot of mentorship and guidance. And yeah, we grew that business from 5 to 25 shops. We had 200 plus employees. Toys R Us went bankrupt during the period of time that I was there, and we had taken 11 of their stores. So for me, it was just about really two things. One, getting to see what a business looked like when it was scaling rapidly and having that experience. And then two, getting the mentorship and insight from somebody who I believe was an exceptional operator. And that shaped a lot of kind of where I've come to today.
But so how do you get into that space? Because this is when you rewind to a 22-year-old Calvin. Calvin didn't want anything to do with business. So how do you think that interest for business built up? Obviously, you started on the loyalty program front. I presume you then built up to a slightly different role. Was it that mentorship that led that interest in business? Or do you think innately you always had something there about business or connecting with people? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So my whole life, I always had this innate feeling that like I was capable of doing great things. I had this like element of self-belief. And when I found myself in a position of doing nothing with my life, like it sucked, because I really felt like I was capable. And I think two things kind of married up for me at that time. I think the first thing was, I had these skill sets, which were, I think, two things. One being, as I said, people, which was always something that just really came very naturally to me. So connecting with people, managing people, leading people, all that kind of stuff. Like I never knew that applied to business until I got into business. And then the other side to it was like just resourcefulness. Like I've always found myself to be someone who can just make something happen out of nothing, and I'm willing to do kind of what it takes to make that thing happen. And when I realized, when you're in school and you're a very social person and you're good with people, they shut you down for that. They tell you you're the naughty kid, like get out of class, stop talking to people, that kind of thing is frowned upon when you're in school. So you come out of school and you don't know that these are things that can actually apply to business and make you successful. And so I suppose when I found that, I started to realize, well, the way that I'd always perceived business was just this like very corporate nature. I never even knew what entrepreneurship was at that time, but now I was in an environment where I was in an entrepreneurial environment and it clicked with me. It clicked with a lot of what I was good at. And I guess to layer on top of that, I think the biggest thing that happened at that time was the belief that he instilled in me. So as I said, I had him on a pedestal. I really thought that he was this exceptional guy. And the fact that he instilled belief in me and confidence in me and believed in me to run huge parts of his operation, when you marry all those three things together, you get to a point where it's like, okay, well, this actually is something that I love and it's something that I'm capable of.
And so to summarize, mate, I think that's such a valid point that people don't understand, that business is about people. And I'm glad that you found that, at some point, because many people don't get that. Many people don't view business as a people business. They view it as, like you said, a corporate situation where you're not necessarily connecting with people. And obviously, a lot of people struggle to find a mentor, and you were lucky to have that mentor, and he gave you that belief. So then, I guess, what had you leave? Like, because naturally after was it 5 years that you left?
Yeah, it was 5 years, and it was an interesting period. So obviously when I got there, as I said, it was 5 shops. It was a very just kind of like get in the dirt and get it done kind of business, at that time, which I loved. And then when that Toys R Us period happened, like obviously for him, he's now seen the biggest player in the market go bankrupt. It's a huge opportunity to capitalize on that market share, and he did. And so, we went on this huge growth trajectory. We took 11 of their stores, but not only did we take their stores, we took a lot of the head office staff as well. So, all these guys that had been in the industry 20, 30 years, like they're now out of a job, and he had the perfect place for them to land. So I guess in turn what happened was I went from being this kind of like right-hand man, the guy that was like at his side helping like kind of really push and scale the business, to then being pigeonholed much lower down the pecking order. As I said, people 20, 30 years my senior with real corporate experience in that industry, coming in and he almost had one person take over lots of different elements of my role. So one person would do one part of my role, one person would do another part of my role, one person would do a third part of my role, and these people were all much better than me as well. And so it kind of left me almost redundant overnight. And it was a very difficult period because I loved that business, and I thought at one point that there was a trajectory for me to become an owner in that business, and everything kind of changed very quickly. And I think it was very difficult for him as well. I think I could see our relationship kind of change, because I think he was probably struggling with the fact that he knew there was no place for me there anymore, but because he cared about me so much, I think he found it difficult to have that conversation at that time. And so, yeah, for me, that kind of went on for probably 6 to 12 months. And then eventually it kind of was just to a point where I'd had enough. And so I went to him, had a conversation, and was just kind of like, look, the reality is you're keeping me here because of our past, and you probably not feel indebted to me, but like he wanted to take care of me. And the reality is there's no place for me here anymore. So I had to leave at that point. So yeah, it was a really difficult time, but looking back at it was the best thing that happened to me.
In hindsight, it's always easy for us to look at that, but that decision would have been super difficult. And do you still stay in touch with him? Is it still connected?
Yeah, so we do. Like we didn't speak for a couple of years after I'd left, but I know, like, his younger brother is a very close friend of mine. So we see each other, in certain scenarios, and it's been really nice. Like, I guess as the years have gone on, we've kind of reconnected on a business front as well, and just having those conversations about where I am now, and like I don't think he quite realized the impact that he had on me until I told him as well. And we were in Hawaii at a wedding together about a year ago, and we spent a lot of time together there. And yeah, we still have that kind of connection and relationship. And I think even to the point where if I needed mentorship or guidance today, I'd be happy to give him a call and sit down. So it's stayed positive.
Such a good story. And then naturally, a risk to go to him. Did you go to him with something else in mind?
No, so this was probably, the most difficult period of my life, because I had spent 5 years, kind of helping build up this business.
Feeling success.
I wasn't feeling financial success yet. At this time, I was still like in my kind of mid to late 20s. The financial reward wasn't quite there yet. It was more about the learning and the experience that I'd had in that period. But now, having left that business, again, I was kind of in a similar place to where I was when I started, because I had left the business. I had no degree. I had no real area of speciality either, because I'd been spread across all areas of that business. And so I didn't even feel like I could go apply for jobs, because I didn't know what I was going to apply in terms of like areas of speciality. So I was pretty lost and concerned again about what I was going to do at that point. And I suppose serendipitously again, a friend of mine had seen Dan, who's the founder of Cub. He had posted on LinkedIn looking for a head of marketing. And a lot of what I did at Toymate was the marketing side of things. And so I was like, you know what, like I need something. So I'm gonna shoot my shot, and just sent him a message on LinkedIn. He said, let's catch up for a chat. And yeah, I'd never heard about Cub before. I'd never really seen anything about it, but walking in there, like I had a really good feeling about it. Dan kind of told me straight away, like, you're not the right person for this role. He was looking for high level CMO kind of thing. So I was quite junior at that point when it comes to marketing, but he was the one who identified in me, like, you got to do sales. Like, we're having these kind of conversations, the way you're talking to me, like, you should be a salesperson. And people had told me that kind of, throughout my life, but never really paid attention to it. And so basically he said to me, like, I'm not going to hire you as a marketing person, but there's a sales role available. And if you want it, like, I'm happy to give you a shot. What I liked about Cub at that time was, the one thing that I was pretty intent on looking for was a business that was in a growth stage, a smaller business that I could go in and actually have an impact on, the same way that I did at the previous company. I didn't want to go into something big where, it's just kind of another clog in the wheel. And so that was what really attracted to me. And then further to that, Dan's passion, obviously, like, out of this world. But further than that, as I said, I'd always had this guy that I worked under on a big pedestal. And the fact that I was then able to go into an environment where I was surrounding myself with everybody who was like him, all these entrepreneurs and business owners, like that was super exciting to me at that time as well. And so, I guess I thought to myself, like, again, never done sales before, but let's give it a shot. And that's where it all started.
Perfect. And so then you took on the sales role, not knowing what sales was, not knowing whether that's something that you're into. At what point did it sink for you that sales is what you're called to do?
Yeah, so sales is what I believe is my calling. Like, sales is my passion. Sales is what I love, and it's what I live and breathe today. But when I first got into it, like, it was an interesting kind of experience. On the one side, I knew I had a natural ability for it, like sitting down with somebody, connecting to them, hearing about their story, asking questions, building a relationship, like that came very easily and naturally to me. The problem that I was having in the early days was I had a lot of like anxiety and imposter syndrome. So I was like sitting in a room with all these successful business owners, trying to kind of sell to them on the one side, and then on the other side, like manage the relationships within our community. And I remember just sitting, in environments with all these people and thinking to myself, like, who am I to be sitting at these tables? What do I have to contribute to these conversations? And I guess just playing with those kind of emotions in the early days was where I struggled. But again, I think it just comes down to that kind of like tenacity to get over the humps. It's like, when you get to a certain point of fear, anything that you're scared of, like either you're going to run towards it or you're going to run away from it. And so I kind of said to myself, like, I've got to just kind of keep doing this and keep doing this and keep doing this. And then what you seem to figure out is, well, A, you start to get results, you start to get runs on the board. And B, you start to realize that like people actually do value what you say, and you do have things to contribute because you've had your own journey. You've had experiences in your life and your career that doesn't matter how successful somebody is, or how further along the journey they are, there are always things that you can contribute to that conversation. And I guess just over time that confidence compounds. And then you get to a point where self-belief becomes very, very strong and very important, which is where I believe I'm at now.
And so, like, you mentioned two things, right? Anxiety and imposter syndrome. I think a lot of people deal with that. A lot of the listeners listening to this are either business owners or people considering going into business. And that in itself speaks of anxiety and imposter syndrome. You had those feelings. Did you do anything to, I guess, address those feelings? Or do you think it was just through graft and hard grind work to continue relying on your strength, which was building a connection and relationships?
Yeah, I think. Look, it's an interesting topic because I think self-awareness is very important in this piece, right? And what I mean by that is like, if you're attempting to do something that you're not good at, like, there's things in business that I am terrible at. I'm the person in my team that everybody laughs at when it comes to admin. Like, I am absolutely horrendous at back end admin, operate, like all that kind of stuff. Like, I am just terrible at. And so, if you were to take me and put me in an environment like that and say, like, go and succeed, I would find that a lot more difficult than somebody that is naturally that way inclined. Not to say that you can't do it, because hard work matters. But I also believe that like talent matters as well. So I would say the first thing is trying to find something that like you actually understand and know that you're good at. So that was the baseline for me. I knew that I had this talent. I knew that I was good at connecting and I was good at selling. And so once I'd kind of identified that in myself, then I said to myself, well, this is going to be my key to succeeding. And so regardless of what gets thrown my way, I need to kind of grit through that, and make it happen for myself, because this is my ticket. And so it's about, I guess, persistence, and just doing the thing. The reps matter as well. Like people kind of, you can't underestimate like how important it is to show up every single day for years and years and years, do thousands and thousands of hours of meetings. Like if I was to track back from, 6 years ago, which is when I started at Cub, to now, I have met thousands of people, and I do it every single day. And I pitch the same way. I ask the same questions. So you can't underestimate that. But yeah, I guess the way that you get out of that like anxiety and the imposter syndrome is through grit, and then through also identifying your skill set and doubling down on that skill set and improving on it. You know, like it's all a craft, it's all a skill, it's all something that can be improved on. So do the work that it takes to improve on that skill, and then eventually you get to a point where you know you're good at that thing, and you know that you've got the skills to provide at that thing. So then the anxiety goes away, the confidence is there, the self-belief is there. Never get arrogant and carried away with it, but it just takes you to a different level when it comes to that thing that you're trying to achieve.
And so I think when you and I met, it was probably 5 years ago, just as you had just started. I've seen the evolution of Cub and how far it's grown, and I would assert that a lot of it was centered around sales. I was just talking to a client the other day, and they sort of spoke about how Cub have a pretty active strategy on LinkedIn and sales, and you mentioned you sort of undertake the same sales pitch when you're meeting with various different people. I want to go into sales. I want to talk about that specifically. Would you assert that sales was a big generator for the growth of Cub?
I think it's an interesting question. I think like the sales function of our business is the most mature function of the business. When I got to Cub in the early days, it's kind of like all we had in terms of growing the company. You know, we had a good product. It was a good product. It wasn't a great product, I would say at that point, nowhere to the point where it is now. But we knew who our market was. We knew what our market needed and what they wanted, which was community with other people in a similar position. And then we had a good, strong sales process to bring them in terms of the growth side of the business. I don't think necessarily that's what has I don't think that's been the key driver to where we've gotten to. I actually think it's much more about the way that we've been able to refine our back end, our operations, our management, the way that we can track, how many events members do when they drop off, how do we get them back involved, understanding them at a different level so that we can contribute value and contribute to their success. I think all those things was what was necessary to put underneath the sales so that when the sales came through, we actually had something to deliver. And I think once we got good at that and we built out a team around that, coupled with moments in time, like COVID, which I think was a huge moment in time for us. I think those are the things that kind of married together in terms of taking the business to where it's gotten to.
Naturally, improving the product is going to be a key part of that. And I've seen the product improve dramatically over that time too. But for the business to grow, for any business to grow, you've got to attribute time to sales. And I say that because a lot of small businesses will say, well, yeah, I've spent so much of my hours, of my time refining my product. You can do that as much as you like. If you're not outbound reaching out to new prospects, your business is not growing. No one's going to know about your great product if you're not focusing on sales. So I suspect sales is one of the things that naturally, as you mentioned, it was a mature process or department, but naturally only got better. What are your thoughts on the strengths? What makes the sales division so good?
Yeah, look, I agree with your point there. To me, when I'm talking to business owners, particularly like B2B, service-based businesses, and they tell me that there's no sales function to their business, it's mind-blowing to me. It's absolutely mind-blowing to me. And that might be coming from a biased perspective because I am part of a very kind of sales-driven function and business. But if you're not doing the activity on the top end and you're just waiting for things to come to you, like you're leaving millions of dollars on the table. There's no doubt about that. I suppose the way that I look at sales is kind of broken up into three main factors. I think on the one side of things, you've got relentless prospecting, and that's what I call the science, and I'll explain that in a second. On the other side of that, you've got salesmanship. So actually being a good salesperson and the ability to close at a very high level. And then what sits in the middle is emotions. And I think that's actually a very underestimated part of when people look at salespeople is how they are actually able to handle their emotions. Because it's a roller coaster. You know, your sales, you're up, you're down, people are kind of in your pipe, they're out the pipe, they're cancelling meetings, they're not showing up, people who you thought were going to sign don't sign. It's happening all the time, and you've got to kind of keep steady in order to navigate that. So I guess I can touch on all three and kind of break that down. So on the prospecting side, you know, that's top of funnel. And so I believe that the only way to have real success in sales and growth is to do that and do that relentlessly. And what I mean by that is every avenue that you can take in terms of filling the bucket, you should be taking. Whether that be, you know, cold calls, whether that be emails, whether that be Instagram DMs, whether that be door knocking, whether that be networking. All these things, you know, if you amalgamate those at scale and you're doing them every single day, your bucket's always going to be full, which allows you to then take it to the other side, which is your salesmanship. You can't, if you're the best salesperson in the world, you can't close anybody if you don't have the leads to close. So you've got to be doing that at all times. Then if you take it to the other side, which is salesmanship, you know, I'm of the belief, or you know, you can check the data on this, but most businesses, at a bare minimum, if you've got a good product, you'll close at about 20%. You know, so 1 in 5 people who come through the door that are qualified leads, the business will close that. And so what that means is, like, just being able to pitch that doesn't really make you a good salesperson. All that means is that you're articulating what the business does, and the business is closing that person. The great salespeople are the ones who take their close rates up to 30, 40, 50, 60. You know, there's some people who close at 80, 90%. And I believe that the way to do that is to sit down with people and really figure out, like, what are the problems that you're having? How can my business, my service, my product fix those problems? And how can I, like, articulate in a very clear manner how I can fix those problems for you? And if you can do that, you know, if somebody comes in, they have an issue, you have a solve for that issue, and you can show them how you're going to solve that issue, why wouldn't they buy from you? So that's where salesmanship comes in. So if you're filling the bucket at a very high level, and then you're becoming a great salesperson, you know, you're winning a lot of deals. The way then to mitigate the emotions is to really look at the science of it all. So, you know, when you're managing a sales team, the thing that you look at most is the numbers. So what I mean by that is meetings booked, meetings attended, and meetings closed. So if you're running a business off, let's just call it a 20% close rate, as we said, that's 1 in 5 deals, right? 1 in 5 people that come through the door close. If you have a 20% close rate, you then need to see, if you're going to close 5, let's say you want to close 5 deals in a month, you need to see 25 people, right? So you're closing 1 in 5. How are you going to see those 25 people in a month? You figure out what your show rate is. Let's say your show rate's 50%. You need to book 50 meetings in a month. So you book 50 meetings, 50% of them rock up. You see 25 people. Of the 25, 1 in 5 closed, you've got your 5 deals. And you as a business can figure out that data based off your historical data that you've got, and you can work off that every single month. And if you're working to those numbers every single month, there should be no emotion, because you know that it's going to pan out. So if you wrap that all up in a bow, I think that's sales.
Mate, 100%. I think you've said it perfectly, and I like the three aspects towards it. You know, the relentless prospecting, the salesmanship, the managing of emotions. I want to talk a little bit more about the relentless prospecting. Mm-hmm. I think that's something that I've seen Cub do really well, and LinkedIn is something that I think a lot of business owners are underutilizing right now. And a super big opportunity, particularly for businesses, as you said, who don't have a sales division, and you can automate a lot of this stuff, right? So talk to me about what it is that you do and Cub does around the prospecting at top of funnel. Yeah.
So again, it's an interesting line here. So I want to be quite clear on this, that, you know, I'll talk through the relentless prospecting on the top of funnel. The interesting line for us is that we are an exclusive club, right? So you're prospecting very hard on the top of the funnel, but as that goes down the funnel, you know, we historically have only been for businesses typically 1 to 50 million in revenue. So a bare minimum of 1 million in revenue. We have now, you know, in the past 6 to 8 months, created another community, which is for early stage businesses, which is 1 to 800K. So that becomes a little bit different, but historically speaking, there was always a line of like, okay, at the top of the funnel, let's get as many in the bucket as possible. But as they come down, you need to refine that and have a process to make sure that the people coming in are the right fit and the right eligibility criteria to our club, which is an interesting process in itself. But, to your question, on the top of the funnel, I'm of the belief, again, going back to that kind of relentless prospecting point, that until somebody says no, it's not a no. So if you're going out on platforms like LinkedIn, like TikTok, like Instagram, like email, like cold calls, and if you were to, let's just say you were to call 100 people, you're calling 100 people, 50 of those people don't respond to you, don't take those 50 people as that they're not interested. There's many different factors that could have gone into them not responding to you. And if you just give up once, again, you're leaving millions of dollars on the table. So, on the top of the funnel, that's the way that I do things. Until somebody gives me a clear no, I'm not going to stop. And so, we'll continue to do the LinkedIn stuff. Like LinkedIn is an interesting place as well, because, people think like, okay, I can just go on and I can message thousands of people and eventually someone's going to get back to me. I'm going to book the meeting and I might do the deal. But it doesn't quite work like that. That's just one element to it. The other element to it is long periods of time of putting out huge amounts of content. So what we've done very successfully is, over the last 7, 8, 9, 10 years, like however long we've been doing it, every single day, if you go on LinkedIn, you will see something from Cub. You'll see an event, you'll see a member highlight, you'll see a podcast, you'll see something with our team, whatever it might be. Like we do that. Our whole sales team does that. Our relationship management team does that. Everybody does that every single day. And so what happens is I might reach out to you today and you don't respond to me, or you reply saying I'm not interested. But then over the next 6 months, I'm putting out content and I'm putting out content and I'm putting out content. And some of that content resonates with you, whether that be an event that, sparks your interest, or a few people in the community that you know and respect and trust. All these different things play factors. I then reach out to you, in 3 months or 6 months, and you've seen all this stuff. And now you say to yourself, oh, you know what? Like maybe I should take a look. So it's the amalgamation of putting out consistent content that's like valuable and relevant, and the relentless nature of hitting up everybody until they say no. That then allows you to kind of keep the bucket full at all times.
And we could dive into to mindset and tenacity around it, but let's go through specifics, because I find the criteria really interesting, because absolutely it is an exclusive club. You've got to meet a certain criteria. And I think many business owners can relate to that. They target a certain size business, whether it's B2B, whether it's B2C, who is it they're targeting, whether it's age, whatever it might be. How do you distinguish criteria?
Yeah, so LinkedIn has great tools, so there's a function on LinkedIn called Sales Navigator, I believe it's called. And basically on Sales Navigator, you can put in exactly where somebody is demographically or geographically. You can put in the title of who they are. So are they an owner, founder, CFO, CEO, whatever it might be. And you can put in a revenue bracket and a head count. So not everybody shares it on LinkedIn, but at scale, it's enough to kind of look at that. And so when you're doing your adding, because first you've got to add people, then you've got to message people. When you're doing your adding, you've actually got a bucket of tens of thousands of people that are sitting in your direct target market. And any business can do that. If you're selling insurance to IT companies, manufacturing companies, commercial construction companies, whatever it is, if you go onto LinkedIn and you put that into Sales Navigator, well, now you've got your market. Now it's about what are you going to do with that market? And I think that's where the intricacy comes in.
And when you say adding, obviously you've got to add a certain amount of people per day, right? Because, let's say you're connected to 4,000 people to start. You want to add a certain amount per week, who are then just more eyeballs seeing your content.
Correct.
Right? And there's some scope around getting in front of more people. Because it's just the way that LinkedIn works, particularly if you tag someone in, you're directly onto their network for sure, which I completely get. Talk to me about the salesmanship. Can you be taught how to be a salesman?
Yeah, so this is a topic that I like to debate with a lot of other people that I know who love sales, and one in particular. I believe yes, you can be taught. I do believe, again, that, you know, this is something that a lot of people disagree with me on, but I believe that you need a talent for it. I think the way that I look at it is it's the same as being an athlete. You know, if you put me if you put me on a basketball court and I put as much work into basketball as Michael Jordan did, or anyone in the NBA, or anybody 5 tiers below that, I'm not going to be as good as them, because I do not have the natural ability or natural talent to be a basketball player. It's that simple. And I believe when it comes to sales, I believe when it comes to business and entrepreneurship in general, it's the same thing. So I think you need to have a talent in order to become great at something, but the more important factor is the work that goes into it. And I guess in short, yes, I do believe that you can be taught to become a great salesperson or a good salesperson. But I think talent matters. And I think having the ability to connect with people is not something that comes naturally to everybody.
My next follow-up question is, how do you teach someone to do it, right? Because I know there's different people in both camps, right? Natural ability can be taught, but in my view, sales is about listening. Like you said, what are your problems? How can I solve it? How do I connect with this person best? And that to me is listening. Sure, you can probably teach listening to some degree, but you've got to care, right? So how do you teach someone to be a better salesperson?
Well, again, I think, you know, if you circle back to my 3 buckets, it's creating systems and processes around those 3 things, you know. So, you know, on a relentless prospecting side, the way that you teach somebody to be very good at that is you set them targets, you set them KPIs, you know, make X amount of calls a day, send X amount of emails a day, do X amount of DMs on Instagram a day. And if you're not doing that, you're not doing your job. And eventually that builds into somebody if they're good. And the other thing is it's incentivizing, right? So like, obviously most salespeople are working off commissions. If you're not going to do that work, you're going to make less money. It's really that simple. So creating good systems around that is important. I think in terms of the salesman and the salesmanship and the art side of it, it's really about, like you said, I think that the first thing that it comes down to is like product knowledge, you know. So you can teach anybody your product and you can teach them that very well. Then what also matters is like time in that business. So people have to, when they first join a company, or, you know, if they want to be doing sales, they've got to understand what they offer as a business and how they can actually fix people's problems. If you don't know your product well enough, you're not going to know how you can solve that person's problems. So teaching them the general kind of functions and understanding of the company itself and how your product or service can help people, that's super important. And then what it comes down to is pitching and line of questioning. So the pitching thing's very interesting because some salespeople don't pitch at all, others do. There's no doubt that the sale is not won in the pitch. Regardless of whether you pitch or not, that's not where the deal's done. I believe that a pitch is important because it helps the person that you're sitting with actually identify what it is they're buying from you. If you don't have a pitch, do they really know what they're buying? You know, they may not, but I don't believe they do. So I think that's where the pitch is important, and you can teach somebody to pitch. That's no problem. That's just regurgitating lines. What then becomes the most important part to teach is the line of questionings that come around that. So both on the initial upfront when you meet somebody and off the back of actually pitching somebody, what questions are you asking to build rapport? You know, so I always say to my team, like, when you greet somebody, firstly, the way you greet them is very important. Be lively, you know, be energetic, shake their hand, look at them in the eye, all that kind of stuff. Like, you can teach people to do that. Something else that I love to share is finding grounds of commonality. You know, so if you walk in and you're wearing a nice watch, or you're wearing nice shoes, or you've got, you know, like maybe you're wearing like something to do with a sports team, or you've got an accent, whatever it might be, like being tuned into all these things. Your accent might be from a country that I've traveled to. Your watch might be a watch that I really like. Your shoes might be a pair of shoes that I want to buy. You know, all these different things allow us to have conversation where we're able to actually build a relationship and find a ground of commonality. So I think that is something that's super important. because then you're having a conversation with somebody. It's not just this like wall up sales environment. And then off the back of all of that, once you've kind of explained your product to people, it's then identifying and asking the right line of questions to where that product can actually be tailored to what they are looking for. That's not something that, I can explain at scale, because different businesses fix different problems. But, actually asking somebody, with what I've explained to you, what would be the ideal outcome for you? Can I show you how you will get to that ideal outcome? Questions like that are what you need to ask in order to actually show people how you can fix their problems. So I don't know if that question was answered well, but these are things that you can teach people, I think.
I think that's the skill. That last bit is the close. Being able to clearly identify the right question and how to provide the product to solve that solution.
100%.
You've definitely answered my question, and I hope you don't mind me just sort of letting you run with it. I mean, I think this is an absolute sales masterclass, in all honesty. So I'm going to sum up a little bit of what you said. Systems is key. For you to teach a salesperson how to sell, systems is key. The reps that you put in, like you mentioned earlier, that's what builds self-confidence. When you've got self-confidence, you can then go and chase targets. And the thing I want to highlight is what you mentioned. Your targets, whilst there might be an end target of KPI around, okay, bring in this much business dollar-wise, a lot of your targets are activity goals. Mm-hmm. Number of reps, number of phone calls, number of meetings, number of closed deals. Not necessarily bring in 25 grand this month, 100 grand this month, whatever it might be. I think that's a huge element. I want to touch in pitching, if you can, briefly, because you mentioned a little bit, you've been running the same pitch for 6 years. Ever got bored by it?
Good question. No, I've never got bored by it, because again, the way I look at it is that's the black and white. That's the black and white part of sales. And the gray is where the magic happens. So the black and white is mundane. Yes, it's repetitive. It's not something that's like exciting in all meetings, but you get excited to get to the gray, So I've always said like the gray is where the deal happens. So it's not something that I get bored of. I think it's something that I have refined over time. I remember when I first started pitching, my pitches would go for like 25, 30 minutes. Now they go for like 2.5 minutes. Because at the end of the day, no one's listening to that. No one's even listening to you. Like you can actually see people's eyes when you're pitching. They're disinterested. Nobody wants to be spoken to in that manner. So getting through that as quickly and as efficiently as possible is the best result, so that you can then get people to talk about them, not you talk about yourself.
How many renditions of your pitch got you to 2.5 minutes of pitching?
Well, thousands.
Yeah, it's the reps, right?
Thousands.
Yeah.
As I said, like if I was to go back and look at how many meetings I've had over the years, it's in the multiple thousands. So.
And do you systemize that pitch? Is all of your salespeople giving the same 2.5 minute pitch, or is it individual per salesperson?
I think they should be. I believe they should be. I think if I was doing a better job, everybody would be pitching the exact same way. That's just my opinion, because that's a process. And if you have a process that works, stick on that. I think our salespeople probably have their own kind of spin on things. They bring their own flavor, but the key points that they're touching on are all the same across the business, which is important. And the main reason it's important is because if somebody's going to buy from you, you have to make sure that they know exactly what they are buying from you and that you've sold them the right product. There's nothing worse than a scenario where you've sold something to somebody and you've promised something that they can't get delivered. So that's the most important part, to actually be able to articulate exactly what somebody's going to get in an honest and clear manner. And so those are the points that we kind of touch on at scale. But yeah, outside of that, I think everybody brings in a little bit of their own flavors.
Yeah, perfect. I think that was an absolute sales masterclass. So I appreciate that, mate. If someone had to ask you, what's your number one factor for success?
For me, I think self-belief and patience would be the main things. I think the self-belief wasn't always there. It started with somebody else believing in me and translated into self-belief. But but I've huge amounts of self-belief. And then patience, like things just take time, you know, and like I've always been very patient to the point where I've had people in my life, friends, family, whatever, like in certain moments in my career saying to me, like, what are you doing? Like, why are you sticking around in this environment or that environment, you know? And it's all worked out. And I think the reason it's worked out is because I've stayed patient. Like things take time. Getting good at things take time. Growing a business takes time. Sharpening your skills takes time. And if you're gonna go on the journey, then see the journey out.
Perfect. And what would you say is one key issue that needs to be fixed in today's business world?
I think technology is obviously something that is on everybody's lips, you know, AI in particular. And technology is important. You know, it's you'd be stupid to say, don't use technology. You know, that you're a dinosaur if you're thinking like that. But I think, especially when it comes to selling, connecting with people, networking, those sorts of things, don't let technology get in the way of actually building face-to-face relationships with people. I believe that's something that people are sleeping on right now. Particularly when I look at, obviously our environment is a networking face-to-face community, and I see the results that come out of something like that. You know, we talk about sales, we can talk about sales as much as we want, but networking is by far the thing that contributes to people's success the most, in my opinion. And that's done face-to-face, you know, going and actually looking somebody in the eye, shaking hands, building relationships is always going to work. Even to the point where I believe that's the thing that's going to work most in a world of AI, where everything's just being taken care of for you. You're never going to be able to replace shaking somebody's hand and sitting down for lunch with them and having a conversation about your life and your journey. So I think that is a problem, in that people are focusing too heavily on the technology and not enough on building relationships.
I'm going to add to that too. I think, you know, you and I have known each other for 5 years or so, and we've been to a couple of lunches and had a bit of fun, but this conversation's been far more in detail, far more in depth. I think we've gotten to know each other a lot more, and I think 100% no AI is going to replace this podcast episode or generate, you know, what it is that we're talking about and going through. In terms of technology, just sort of relate that to sales. Outside of LinkedIn and Sales Navigator, are there any other pieces of tech that you rely upon in your sales role?
Yeah, so I'd say that's probably the area that I'm weakest at. You know, we still do things very manually. Obviously CRM's hugely important, but outside of that, like, there's not a huge amount of tech that we use. I do believe that Zoom is a great tool. You know, if people want to use a little kind of takeaway from this conversation, obviously, you know, I'm kind of contradicting myself a little bit here in that, you know, you want to build relationships face to face. However, if you have a very fast paced sales cycle, often your prospects are busy people, you know, particularly if they're business owners, and they can't always meet you face to face. And so instead of waiting for that meeting to happen, use the tools at your disposal to make them happen. So getting an upfront meeting on Zoom as opposed to somebody canceling your meeting is a much better result. That's something that I use at scale. But yeah, look, I think there's great tools out there. It's just not something that I've dabbled in yet, but definitely to come.
And so do you automate any of your messages post ad, or are they all individual to the person?
In terms of like automating outreach?
Yeah.
Well, I still do that all myself.
Yeah.
Like, you know, that's still manual. I'm still looking at people's profiles.
And
I'm still reaching out.
After you've seen their profile.
Yeah. So, you know, it's still, and people sometimes think I'm insane for still doing that myself because but weirdly, and this might just be something that's like my head's in the cloud with, but I've always found when I do it myself, I get better results. You know, I have tried the automation stuff, you know, where you're just pinging me people messages in an automated way, and I've never found that works as successfully as doing it yourself. So don't fix what's not broken, I suppose.
Yeah, love that. What's a key business risk that you see in your business or in your client's business that you talk to them about on a daily basis?
Good question. I mean, I think I can touch on the way that people perceive networking. And in my opinion, the way that they perceive it, it's wrong. It's the wrong way to look at it, which I think is a risk when people are looking at that kind of stuff. I'm very mindful to talk about the things that I know, and typically that's networking and sales. But what I find is when people look at networking environments, whether that be us or others, a lot of what they look for is just a quick win and an ROI. And it's just not a good way to look at things, because, building relationships with great people in business, it's not just about doing deals. It's about actually making yourself a safer business owner. If you run into problems, which you inevitably will, who are the people that you're going to turn to in that scenario? And who are the best people for you to turn to in that scenario? It's people that are going through or have been through a similar journey. And you know this, you've done this for 5 years now. You do other networking things as well. You're a part of a whole bunch of different stuff, which I believe is the best way to do it. Abundance is the best way to do it. But if you needed anything in business right now, you probably have 10, 15, 20, 50 people that you could call upon. How is that going to make you worse off? And imagine you had come to Cub and said, if I don't get a deal in my first 12 months, I'm going to leave. Like, how differently things would have panned out. So I just think, the risk in, you asked about risk. I think the risk in looking too much for quick wins in environments where you're trying to build relationships, the compounding effect of you staying there over a long period of time far outweighs the value of doing one deal in a short period of time. And I think that's something that people should consider more.
And I think to sum that up, for me, I would suggest one of the biggest risks is the money left on the table
100%.
by not doing sales and networking. Sure, you depicted it perfectly. People think sales and networking is dirty at times because there are people that go into networking scenarios, sales scenarios, chasing the end goal, the outcome, being connected to that outcome. And I could dive into, being attached to that result, which people can sniff. That people can smell that out from a mile away. It's about building the relationship, like you said, that makes the real difference. People really feel for genuine connection. And that's what makes good salespeople, I think, and I do believe that can be taught. There's an element of natural ability to care and listen, but I do think that they can be taught.
100%. And to further that point, the way that people end up doing business is through building good organic relationships. So if you're going into those environments and you're just being a salesperson and all you want to do is pitch and sell and that's all you care about is the deal, you're not going to get the deals. It's a bit of a juxtaposition. It's the people that don't care about the deals that actually are there to help people, connect people and build relationships that are the ones that inevitably do the most business anyway. So yeah, it's an interesting thing to navigate, but building relationships over time is hugely valuable.
And so lastly, talk to me a little bit about your vision. Naturally, you can talk to the Cubs vision, but I want to know Calvin's vision. Where do you see yourself in the future?
Yeah, look, the truth is I don't know. I think right now I'm attached to what Cub's vision is. I've been in this business for 6 years now. When I started in the company, it was still in its infancy. It was about 3.5 years in. We had maybe 5 or 6 people in our team. We now have, close to 40. We have clubs in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. Parramatta's just opened last night. And, the journey that we've been on to get here is what excites me about the journey for the future. For me, I'm now obviously an owner in the Sydney business, and I want to expand on that. There's going to be lots of different things that we start building into our business. And I want to be a part of that. I want to be an owner in those things. To touch on, I guess, what that looks like from a Cub point of view, really the goal and the mission for us is to be synonymous with entrepreneurship in this country. So the same way that people think about Nike, Adidas for athletes, we want people to think about Cub that way, when it comes to business. And if you look at the different ecosystems that we're starting to build out, you've got BOA, which is a social media platform for business owners. A lot of the time that's attracting very, very early stage businesses, people with side hustles, people who are first getting into business. Then we've got our early stage business community, 100 to 900K in revenue. And then we've got the Cub community, which is 1 million plus in revenue. you're starting to build out this ecosystem where we are able to support all levels of entrepreneurship. And we want to scale that across the whole country. And then we want to scale that globally. And we believe that we can. So I suppose, for me to look at that and the potential for growth and scale in our business, the way that Dan strategizes and the ambition that he has. For me right now, the future is Cub, and I'm just excited to kind of continue to grow with what we're doing.
And you've raised a very good point, which I can't believe I almost stepped over. I mean, thinking about the incentive of you wanting to stay with Cub, and let's briefly go back a little bit and talk about incentives when it comes to sales teams, because no one person can continue doing the same sales pitch for 6 years without getting bored, without having the incentive there. So how do you incentivize your sales team?
Yeah, look, I mean, we can speak about myself first. The incentive for me was ownership. I said to Dan very early on that I want to be an owner, and luck plays its part in this, in that I came into the business at a time where that was possible. That's not always possible, but I came in at a time where it was, and he kind of mapped out a journey for me. He mapped out goals that I needed to achieve in order to get to that point. And a very important thing, I think, for business owners to take away from this is that he mapped that out for me, and when I delivered what I needed to deliver, he delivered as well. A lot of people lose their best people because they don't deliver the things that they promise they're going to deliver. And if he hadn't delivered, I would have left, because how can you trust somebody after that? Yeah. Obviously, you've got to earn it. You've got to do the things that you need to do to get it. But on the other side, once you've done that, then you expect that to be delivered as well. And so I have to credit him in that sense that he was honest with me when I wasn't there yet. And when I was there, he delivered what he said he was going to deliver. So that was kind of what incentivized me, to kind of go on the journey that I went on. But look, in terms of salespeople, it's very simple. It's just commission. If you're hiring a salesperson and they aren't money hungry, don't hire them. It's really that simple. That sounds like crass or whatever, but salespeople need to be money hungry. You almost want your salespeople, even if they're making 300, 400, 500 grand a year, you want them to be still feeling a little bit stressed about their finances, because then they're just always hunting down the next deal. That's the kind of mentality that I think a great salesperson needs to have. And so you've got to figure out what that structure looks like. You never want to over kind of compensate people. They need to deliver bare minimum for the business. That's what their base is there for. But outside of that, commission is what salespeople should be there for.
And you can over-engineer it, most certainly. But interestingly, the Cub model is similar to the model. Obviously, we run an insurance business outside of this, but similar to our model where you've got some existing business and some new business. So how do you incentivize that differently, if at all?
Yeah, well, we actually have two separate teams in that respect. So we have a growth team on the one side. So they are only responsible for bringing in new business, and they get incentivized only on new business. Once they bring that person in, we have a relationship management team who then sits with them, gains an understanding of their business, and becomes their person who is there to deliver the value that they're looking to gain out of the club. And so that person then becomes incentivized on their retention. So the salesperson is there for the growth. They hand them on to the relationship manager, whose job is then to make sure that they're getting value out of the club. They stay in the club, and then they are incentivized on their renewals. So I think that's quite important, because I think in order for people to succeed, they need to focus on one thing. And if you had your sales team focusing on both new sales and renewals, it shifts the focus away. I've been in that position where I've been focusing on both, and it's very difficult to juggle because they're two very different things. So I think if you can, setting up a structure where you have two different teams doing your growth and your retention, that's always a good idea.
Yeah, you can definitely split focus and then lose track of it a little bit. In terms of, if you're happy and comfortable to share it, percentage splits, what works for a sales team? What's overcompensating? What's undercompensating? And how do you do it differently with the growth and the existing team? Because naturally, I presume growth still to some degree feeds a little bit of the existing team. So how do they differ, and how do you make that work?
Yeah, look, I won't share exact numbers, but I'll share ideas. So on a growth side, as a salesperson, obviously, like if you're paying a salesperson a base, right? Not all salespeople get base. If they're commission only, that's a very different thing. But if you're paying a salesperson a base, their sole job is to sell and to bring new business into your business. And so they need to deliver a bare minimum as part of what their base is. So they need to deliver that bare minimum. And once they eclipse that bare minimum, then you can start paying percentages in terms of how much further they go above that bare minimum. So it's almost like a tiered up system where you've got a bare minimum that you need to sell. And then as the deals increase from there, you can pay a higher and higher percentage. On a retention side, it's a bit different because it probably is easier to renew somebody than it is to sell somebody. So you structure that a little bit differently. But yeah, I think it's just important that you lay it out in a way where those people are being paid their base to deliver a certain thing, and then you can start paying their commissions over and above what that certain thing is.
Yeah, perfect. Well, mate, firstly, thank you so much. I think there's so much wisdom that has been brought on, but from a sales perspective, growing any business, sales is super important, right? I'm excited to see the vision to come to fruition for both yourself and Carb. If people want to find you, naturally they can find you on LinkedIn, I presume.
Yeah, LinkedIn's the place. Also Instagram. I'm trying to build out this whole Instagram personal branding thing. So Calvin Chilchik _Cub. But yeah, LinkedIn or Instagram are the places to find me.
And you've been dropping some nuggets of gold on video.
I'm doing my best. Yeah.
Calvin, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Socius, thank you for joining us today. Please hit the subscribe button if you've enjoyed this episode. And if you'd like to be part of the Socius community, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn to stay in touch. Cheers.